Thank you for coming with me this evening. I want to begin tonight by giving you 3 pictures from a relationship. Pictures from the unique friendship between the United States and Israel, and they're personal pictures. The first one stems back to 2008, before I was in this job. I was at an institute in Jerusalem doing my research, and one day I get a call from the naval attaché at the U.S. Embassy. He said, it's the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel, and in honor of that great event, we would like to fly you out to the USS Truman, which is patrolling somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean. Would you like to go? So I thought about it for about a quarter of a second. Are you kidding me? So I was driven out to some obscure airfield near Tel Aviv airport and put onto a propeller plane of the U.S. Navy, strapped in with earplugs, and nobody told me that this airplane was going to go from 180 miles an hour to 0 in less than a second when it landed on the Truman. So you land, and I'm in the seats, and my eyeballs are somewhere up there. And the people, the naval people thought this was very funny. I didn't think it was that funny. And I get out of this aircraft, and the USS Truman was actually somewhere between the island of Rhodes and the coast of Turkey. And you come out, and here's this American city floating in the middle of nowhere, 5,200 crew members, all waiting for me. Why are they waiting for me? Because I'm there to give them a series of lectures about the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship on the anniversary of Israel's 60th anniversary on a ship named for the first president who made America the first nation on earth to recognize the newly created state of Israel. Scene 2. A few years later, I'm an ambassador, and I get to travel to wonderful cities around the United States, and one of those wonderful cities was Denver, capital of Colorado. And while in Denver, I was brought into the assembly of the state of Colorado. It's a bicameral type of government. Both houses of the government of Colorado were presented with a bill that expressed total, unequivocal support and love for the state of Israel. And in my presence, both of those bills passed unanimously in both houses of the Colorado Assembly. Scene 3. Scene 3, several months ago, our son Yoav was living in the city of Cincinnati doing some training for his work, and Sally and I made a state visit to Cincinnati. And wherever I go to some city, I try to usually visit different communities, particularly Christian communities, do outreach to Latino communities, to African American communities. I was brought on a Sunday morning to an African Baptist church in an industrial area of downtown Cincinnati. And I walk in this church, and it's a scene like you see in a movie, people singing rapturously, dancing. And when I came in, everybody stood up and embraced me. In the middle of this African church in downtown Cincinnati, what was the connection between these people and the ambassador of the state of Israel, a country that's 7,000 miles away? How do you explain each and every one of these scenes? How can you explain it? And to begin to understand that explanation, the reason, you have to go back. You have to go back before the creation of the State of Israel. You have to go back before the creation of the United States of America. You have to go back to the beginning of the 17th century when the first buckled shoe lit on a certain stone off the Massachusetts shore, and the owner of that shoe, a leader of the Puritan Pilgrims, declared that Massachusetts was the new Zion. It's a very nice state, but why Zion? And the reason is deeply embedded in the Puritan tradition. The Puritans were a dissenting sect in England at the beginning of the 17th century. They'd suffered terribly at the hands of the official church of England. And in an attempt to better cope with their suffering, they looked into the Bible. They're looking for a biblical model. They looked into the New Testament. They didn't find it. They looked back into what they called the Old Testament, and there they saw something extraordinary. They found a God who spoke to his people in their own language. And he made them a promise. He promised to rescue them from exile. He promised to bring them back to their homeland. And the Puritans read this story, and they loved this story. This is our story. It became their story. They became the new Jews, the new Israel. England became the new Egypt. The Atlantic Ocean became the new Sinai. They escaped, and they landed in this country, on this continent, and they likened it to the new Promised Land. And if you're on the East Coast, you find about 1,000 cities and towns that have Hebrew names. You have the Sharons and your Bethlehems and your Jerichos and your Zions. And they gave Hebrew names to their children, the Davids and the Rebeccas and the Sarahs and the Isaacs. They made Hebrew a mandatory language at all of their universities. You know, James Madison was a Hebrew major at Princeton, and he failed. I can identify. I can commiserate James Madison. So deeply was ingrained this biblical narrative in the minds and hearts of the founding fathers and mothers of this country that at the conclusion of the American Revolution in 1783, there was a debate over what was to be the great seal of this newly founded United States. And there were some American leaders who had this notion that it should be the bald eagle. But there was another group of prominent Americans that said, no, the great seal of the United States should show Moses leading the children of Israel out of bondage and into the Promised Land. And there was a really heated debate, and America came this close to having Moses as your national symbol. It lost out. You got the follically challenged bird instead. But you should know that the authors of the Moses symbol were none other than Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. They had so deeply internalized the biblical narrative. Now, for many of the descendants of these Puritans, the fact that they were the new Jews meant that they had a strong sense of kinship with the old Jews. We were mishpucha, in short. And the fact that they had inherited a new promised land meant that they had a strong connection to the old promised land, the land of Israel, and they concluded that to be good Christians, to be good Americans, it was their divinely ordained duty to help those old Jews return to their old promised land, to help fulfill the biblical promises of ending the Jews' exile and their restoration to independence in the land of their fathers. And thus was born the notion of restorationism, which wasn't a peripheral notion in early America. You had John Adams, the second president of the United States, saying it was his fondest wish that someday 100,000 Jewish soldiers would march back into Judea, as he called it, and reclaim their ancient independence. Abraham Lincoln, in 1863, pledged that once he restored American unity after the Civil War, he would work to help restore the Jews to their own independence in the land of Israel. Woodrow Wilson, the grandson and son of Presbyterian ministers, said it was his greatest honor to help the Jews return to their homeland, and he was instrumental in persuading the British government at the end of World War I to issue the Balfour Declaration, in which the British Empire pledged to help recreate a Jewish national home in the land of Israel. And that pledge was instrumental in the decision of the UN in November 1947 in partitioning what was then called Palestine into an independent Arab and an independent Jewish state. The Arabs rejected it, the Jews accepted it, and that Jewish state was set to come into being on May 14th, 1948, and a deeply embittered, acrimonious debate broke out in Washington over whether the President of the United States should recognize that state. In an event that has really no parallel to my knowledge in the annals of American foreign policy, every major advisory board, whether it's the State Department, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, said to the President of the United States, don't do it. Don't recognize that state. You recognize the Jewish state, the Arabs are going to cut off oil to the United States. The communists are going to take over Western Europe. The Jews of Palestine can't defend themselves. We're going to have to send the American army over there to defend the Jews. And the President of the United States locked himself in the White House for 48 hours, and he thought about it. That president, of course, was Harry Truman. Harry Truman claimed to have memorized the Bible by age 14. He was a strict Baptist. And he thought about it, and at 11 6:11 p.m. on the evening of Wednesday, May 14th, 1948, 11 minutes after David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's independence, Harry Truman walked out and made the United States the first nation on earth to recognize the recreated Jewish state of Israel. Why would he do such a thing? Why would a president go against the advice of all of the senior counselors, risk all of the dangers that they were warning him about? He had one answer. He was asked, "Why did you do this, Harry Truman?" And he said very simply, he said, "I'm Cyrus," he said. "I'm Cyrus." Those of you who know your Bible know that Cyrus was the ancient Persian king who rescued the Jews from exile and restored them to their promised land. I'm Cyrus. Deep spiritual connection between the state of Israel and the American people. America is the most religiously observant, industrialized state on earth. More people attend a house of worship in this country weekly, whether it be a church or a synagogue or a mosque, weekly than in any other modern state on earth. People read their Bible. And the spiritual connection between Israel and the United States is one of the reasons, and I think one of the primary reasons, why support for Israel in this country is at a 20-year high right now. Over three-quarters of Americans define themselves as pro-Israel, and many of those Americans are reading the same Bible that John Adams read, same Bible that Abraham Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson and Harry Truman read. There's a promise there, and God does not renege on his promises. Israel comes into being in 1948 not only as a Jewish state, though. It comes into being as a democratic state, as the only functioning democratic state in the Middle East. A state which, like the United States, has a rule of law, has representative government, has open and free elections, which promises in its Declaration of Independence a Declaration of Independence which draws its inspiration from the American Declaration of Independence, full equality of rights for all of its citizens, irrespective of religion, race, creed, or sex. Took it one step further in our Declaration of Independence. It is a country which is one of the few nations on earth, and America belongs to this group, along with Canada, Britain, New Zealand, Australia, one of the few nations on earth that has never known a second of non-democratic rule. Think about that. In spite of pressures that we have known since our creation that would have crushed many other democracies many times over. I think it's one of Israel's towering achievements, our democracy. That is the confluence, the communality of our democratic values form one of the great pillars of our relationship with the United States. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to the victims of 9/11 outside of Jerusalem. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to John Fitzgerald Kennedy in the forest outside of Jerusalem. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to Martin Luther King right down the street from our home in Jerusalem. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has not one, but two replicas of a Liberty Bell, inscribed with the words from Leviticus, "May freedom ring throughout the entire land." Israel. Now, so there were spiritual ties, there was the common democratic values, there was not a strategic relationship. That didn't occur immediately. Those people who say that Israel and the United States were always allies in the military sense is simply not true. It didn't occur until after a certain war that occurred in June 1967, a six-day war. And on the seventh day, American leaders woke up and said, whoa, there's this superpower in the Middle East that just defeated several Soviet-backed armies. Maybe we should be allied with this country. And thus was born the U.S.-Israel Strategic Alliance, which has blossomed and flourished in directions which would have been inconceivable in Israel's first year. And I could probably spend an hour just talking about our military cooperation. The intelligence relationship between the United States and Israel is unequaled by America's intelligence relationship with any other country in the world. We are engaged. Please. American and Israeli forces train together. We just had the largest joint maneuver ever. American ships, warships, pay ports of call in Haifa, and it is the best port of call for American sailors in the Mediterranean. They love Haifa. American planes land in Israel. American prepositions close to $1 billion worth of weaponry and military material underground in the state of Israel. Israel, together with the United States, have developed the most advanced and battle-proven anti-ballistic systems on the entire planet. We have provided armaments for American vehicles fighting in Iraq, firstly, now in Afghanistan. 20,000 American vehicles have been armored by a small kibbutz in northern Galilee that was founded by Americans in 1948, Kibbutz Sasa. I get the letters. I get the letters from the parents, from the wives, from the grandparents, thanking us for saving their children's lives in the battles in Iraq and Afghanistan. I get those letters. We have developed defense systems that can take out rockets fired at tanks. We've developed systems that can identify improvised explosive devices that have been so injurious to American soldiers. We are there with you. American planes, every American military aircraft, whether it be helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft, fly with Israeli components and Israeli concepts. That's how closely we are allied on the military plane. Extraordinary. So, spiritual ties, democratic values, strategic alliance, and now, in recent years, a new pillar is rapidly arising. You know, I spent about 30 years studying the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I thought I knew it all, and then I came into this job, and it was very humbling. I found out that I knew very little. And it turns out that the U.S.-Israel relationship is more multifaceted, deeper than anything I ever thought. One of these new pillars is the pillar of financial and commercial connections. Today, the state of Israel is America's 20th largest customer in the world. We have passed Russia, we've passed Spain, we've passed Argentina, we've passed Ireland. Israel is the 12th largest export destination for the United States of America. Israel had the first free trade agreement with the United States of America. Since that free trade agreement was signed over 20 years ago, trade between the United States and Israel, bilateral trade, has expanded by 300%. We're talking about close to, in the last decade alone, close to $90 billion of American investment in Israel and close to $60 billion of Israeli investment in the United States of America. Israel, as many of you know, is a high-tech giant. Right after the United States, we have the most number of startup companies. Per capita, we have the most in the world. We have more startup companies in Israel than all of Europe combined. A country of less than 8 million people, we're number 3 on the NASDAQ exchange after the United States and China. We devote about half of our national income to development and research in high tech. Just extraordinary. And America is deeply, deeply involved in our high technology. In the world markets, they think of Silicon Valley and Tel Aviv as part of the same market. We're so deeply engaged with one another. Every major American high-tech company, Motorola, Microsoft, Intel, has their R&D centers in Israel. Intel has 2 R&D centers in Israel. Apple is opening its first foreign overseas research center in the state of Israel. All of your computers, almost all of your cell phones contain Israeli concepts, contain Israeli products, whether it's your flash drive, whether it's your intuitive browser. These are all Israeli inventions, and you have them. You have them in your home. If you got Intel inside, you got Israel inside. Believe me, you got it all. And at a time when many American corporations are outsourcing to Asia jobs, Israeli corporations are outsourcing to the United States. I spend a big chunk of my time going around cutting ribbons, opening up Israeli corporations. I just opened up a branch of ELTA, the radar-making company in Maryland. The point is going to employ 100 skilled engineers in the state of Maryland. Tens of thousands of Americans are employed by Israeli companies throughout the United States, and including in the state of California. Isn't that amazing? Now, does this mean we agree on everything all the time? Guess what? We don't. No two allies, no matter how close, can agree on everything all the time. Those of you who know your World War II history, Britain and the United States, very close allies, Roosevelt and Churchill, they disagreed about so many things. But it was a great alliance. And the U.S.-Israel alliance is absolutely no different. We've had differences over recent years over the settlement issue. In many ways, that is not a new difference. It goes back to the Johnson administration. Differences over the status of the city of Jerusalem, our capital. And in many cases, that's a difference that goes back to Harry Truman, because the United States back then didn't recognize West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And differences over the Iranian issue as well as times, you might have noticed in the press. But all I can say to you is this, is that the differences we have are vastly, vastly overshadowed by the areas in which we have complete agreement. And whether it's in dealing with the turmoil throughout the Middle East, whether it's dealing with the threat posed by the Syrian chemical arsenal, whether it is dealing with terrorism throughout our region and indeed throughout the world, and even on the areas in which supposedly we have differences, on the peace process, even the areas of agreement there vastly, vastly outweigh the differences we have. Both the United States and Israel call for the immediate resumption of direct talks between Israel and the Palestinians. Both reject the notion of Palestinian unilateral moves in the General Assembly, any attempt to end-run the peace process. Both call for negotiations on the basis of all the core issues, whether it be borders, security, Jerusalem, leading to a solution of two states for two peoples. Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, Palestine living side by side in permanent peace and security and legitimacy. No difference whatsoever. On the Iranian issue, we both are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. We both view Iran's nuclear program as a paramount security threat, and together we are working quietly, discreetly, to achieve that goal and to save not just the state of Israel in the region, but prevent the world from a prohibitive threat of Iranian nuclearization. The great litmus of any alliance is not whether the two countries agree on everything, but the degree to which we can resolve our differences and move beyond them. And by that criteria, the U.S.-Israel relationship is truly one of the great alliances in history, and in this country's history, I will argue it is the closest and most multifaceted alliance that this country has had with any foreign nation in its post-World War II period. Nothing like it anywhere in the world. Friends, the Middle East is roiling. I come from the field of history. I have enough trouble predicting the past. Anybody tells you what they know what the Middle East is going to look like 2 years from now, 2 months from now, 2 hours from now, don't listen to them. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. There is only one thing that is absolutely certain. There's one thing you can bank upon 100%. That whether it be in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years, there will be one country in the Middle East, one country, which is economically robust, which is militarily strong, with an army that's bigger than the British and the French armies combined, a citizens' army. One country that has never known a second of non-democratic rule, and one country which is categorically, unequivocally pro-American, in which American flags are never burnt in the streets, they're waved in the streets. That country is the sovereign state of Israel. And that country is not only America's ally, that country is America's ultimate ally, and will remain so. Tomorrow, open up your computers, your Israeli component-contained computers, and you look in your email, and you'll get a little film clip which we're going to send to each and every one of you. It's a film clip of a last scenario. I'll leave you with the last picture. A couple weeks ago, we had the Hanukkah party at the White House. It's always one of my great privileges to go to the Hanukkah White House celebration. And this was a special year. It's always as good as the Hanukkah celebration at the Indian Embassy in Washington, which you should never miss. It's latkes and dal. And it's a great festive event at the White House. And this was a special year because just several weeks before this, I had gone to visit West Point, the American Military Academy, and I had addressed, again, a whole group of cadets. They were so interested in Israel. It followed up on a similar visit I'd made to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. 1,600 midshipmen and women came to hear me there. At West Point, I met the Jewish choir of West Point at the chapel. And they came out and met me, and they sang chord, and they were singing at the White House. And it was beautiful. Wonderful young Jewish cadets singing in Hebrew at the White House. And singing Jerusalem of Gold, singing great Hebrew songs. And then after the White House, there was another reception at Congress for a Hanukkah party, and who was there but the Israel Defense Forces choir. And I got it into my mind, can we get these two choirs together? So I made some quick phone calls. We talked to a couple of congressmen. And a half an hour later, who walks into the Library of Congress where this party was being held, but the West Point choir and the IDF choir. And both choirs got up on the stage and together sang Hatikva. I want you to look at this tomorrow. And when you look at this clip tomorrow, we didn't have the means for showing it tonight, I think you'll understand what this alliance means. Thank you all. Tada. Please, calling on